Hello again.
Hi there.
Hey everyone. I think we're going to wait for our host to introduce this session.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the other presenters. But so this panel session is just a sort of general Q&A session for all the panelists, and also if you guys have questions for each other and if you've got any comments about each other's presentations. I think, Dave, could you maybe start with you about your opinion of SAFe, because SAFe has been mentioned a couple of times today. We've had one presentation.
Yeah, I mean, the basic. I mean, if you look at the growth of SAFe, right? Well, I'll give this the example of doing. So he starts off by saying, if you do the 5-day course, you can sell the 3-day course provided you pay me some money, and that's called a Ponzi scheme. Right, so SAFe grew rapidly out of the desire of Agile people to give people certificates and training. You then played to the executive need to have something big and complicated which will take 3 years and cost a lot of money to implement, because then they can initiate the process but not be held liable for what happens later. Yeah? And then he took everything that anybody wants to buy, and if you want to buy something, Dean will give you a certificate, and they just added design thinking. Yeah, they made their own version of Scrum. So it's a classic late life cycle attempt to consolidate everything into some massive bloody engineering diagram, give people a linear process to adopt it, and hope to God it works. Yeah, and it's exactly what Agile should not be about. And I know a huge amount of SAFe institutions which have failed, but nobody dares admit they failed because of the money they spent on them and the products. So I think it's wrong, and it's wrong in the first principle. It's dangerous with it. It will collapse the way that things like Six Sigma ultimately collapse, because they tried to put a highly engineering structure on a complex organic system. Other than that, I don't like it very much.
That's one way of saying it in some way. I guess I'm always interested in the feedback, and we do actually have some feedback on the line, so can all the speakers just check their mics and stuff, so make sure you're on mute if you're not speaking. But I would like to put this out to those watching, actually. I feel like there's a lot of people here with a lot of experience around this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on what you feel like the next steps after Agile are. I feel like common sense is an easy answer, but how would you frame it? How are we going to use that, Dave? But I think we can do better than this, right? So let's get some collective panel here and put in your thoughts in the chat.
Cool. My presentation made a lot of comments about Agile and fragile, and for me, the big issue with Agile is when it's abused. When it's used properly as a genuine methodology, at least in the CRM space, it seems to work pretty well. But so often it's used as a way of getting the project over the line, and what's actually delivered is a million miles from what any Agile expert would recognize as Agile. Hence, I call it fragile.
It's also the context as well. I mean, I've seen it work well in CRM and short life cycle HR projects, but I wouldn't let it anywhere near corporate strategy. Yeah, so if you've got short cycle, high intensive user requirement stuff, you can work stuff in short cycles. Anything more complex, you need to take a different approach. Yeah, and it's not only fragile to build on that. When it shatters, it creates sharp, pointy things that damage you. Yeah.
I have found the most awesome font to demonstrate the Agile fragile morph. I think another point that was made to me in a presentation I was involved in a couple of years ago about Agile is the understanding that you don't need to go live with every sprint. Often there's logic in having a sprint that does everything bar probably user training and the go live, and you might have 2 or 3 or 4 of those together, and then you go live, because if 1 or 2 or 3 sprints don't deliver a minimum viable product, you can't foist that on the user base in the interests of Agile.
Yeah, and I think to build on that a bit, and one of the things we say within Cynefin is if you've got multiple hypotheses, you do parallel experiments or parallel sprints, so be shorter cycles, and see what happens, right? It's why we talk about Scrum as a liminal technique in Cynefin, because it's designed, it assumes it knows the range of what it's got to do, and it delivers. So it's to move things from complex to complicated, and there's its power. But I think this is the wider issue, is Agile got defined by Scrum. Now, this is an irony, because actually XP is closer to the heart of what Agile is about. But if it had been based on XP, we wouldn't have heard about it, because XP people can't talk to ordinary mortals in words that they understand. Whereas Scrum was defined in such a way that it was fast adoption. This is Brasso's work on abstraction and codification. So people started to think about Agile in terms of certificates and structured processes, and Agile hasn't broken away since. And that's the problem. SAFe just took it to extreme. And now, by the way, we've now got Agile 2, which is one of the most complete sets of nonsense I've seen in my life. You know, we got fast Agile. Everybody's trying to create a new, and it's just crazy, all right? We need to go back to the basics and start to look at different methods and different tools, and start to get really pragmatic about context-based solutions, rather than this constant, I call it the Billy Graham school of management consulting. You know, everything has to be something brand new, and you have to go to the mercy seat and confess your past failings, and now come out wearing, you know, white shirts and ties with a ridiculous grin on your face. And that's what happens when people get their first SAFe certificate.
Hi everyone. I would also like to put my thoughts on this. I have safely kept myself away from SAFe for a number of years. And sometimes I feel that probably I'm ignorant. Probably it is good, because there's so many people around us always talking about SAFe. But anytime that I have looked at it, I think that we are going deeper and deeper into more processes, more layers, and I think some people who are still new to the Agile way of working, right, or Agile mindset, they will get lost, and they do get lost. Hence, I'm not able to buy the concept. But there is so much industrialization around SAFe that it seems like nothing else exists in the market when you go out. And if you are in your own niche and you're talking to your community, it's good. But when you go out, for example, I have this Women in Agile community in Singapore that I started. A number of people who approach us are SAFe consultants, and they just want to come and tell about how important that is, and how many success accolades they have gathered through this, and not really sure about it.
Yeah, and just, I mean, in terms of, this is me, I've been in corporate strategy most of my life. When something becomes as commoditized as SAFe, it's reaching the end of its life cycle, and that's when you introduce new things. Yeah, high commodification and domination reduces variety in the system, which reduces the energy cost of novelty. This is 101 corporate strategy. Yeah, when IBM dominates, it gets replaced by Microsoft. When Microsoft dominates, it gets replaced by Apple. You can see the cycle going time and time again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Dave, actually. And it kind of joins into something Alex asking here about, is there a like maybe there's strength in combining these things? And I guess I just want to kind of touch on something with that. I think, like others have said here, that these things, when they're commoditized, they're they become a bit of a cargo culture. You're kind of following them without understanding the reasoning behind them. And I think what's really important when we're doing, product management, or Rohit's touching on here, quality management, is to understand the reason why we're doing it, apply a bit of common sense. But it's also maybe not the why as a destination. I tried to touch on this a bit in my talk, that the why really is about the journey. It's about making a faster feedback cycle so that you can understand your users, because your target state is not your goal. Your goal is being present in the moment, being able to get input to your product and being able to be evolvable. So structuring your process so that you can get feedback from the stakeholders, from the people that you're impacting, is more important than following this or that. And so I think I like what you're saying here, Alec, that you can pick from the strengths here and like Dave, you're saying, and not commoditize it too much and follow it rigidly, but consider intelligently what the needs are. And again, I'd say the needs are always to be evolvable, to bring evolvability to the top level of your processes, as well as your mindset and obviously the product too. So yeah.
I think you need to come back briefly on that, though, to this point about how Agile grew. So what Scrum did is it represented things at a level of abstraction and codification, which allowed for fast adoption. Right? And so if you're going to take a multi-method, multi-vendor approach, you've got to create enough structure that the thing can scale. Yeah, that's what we talked about in scaffolding. You can't just have good people do good things. And by the way, that's the way SAFe survives. People don't actually do SAFe. They call it a Trojan horse. And then they do what seems sensible at the time, within the SAFe boundary. And as I keep telling people, look what happened to Troy when the Trojan horse was allowed in. Yeah. So I think you need to have some degree of structure. There's also a thing in social science which IT people need to be aware of, which is called the woozle effect. So this comes from Winnie the Pooh, if you know your Winnie the Pooh. So one day Winnie the Pooh goes out in the snow and he walks around the copse and he comes back and finds his own footprints, but he doesn't know there is footprints. So he summarizes they're a woozle. So he walks around again and now there are 2 woozles. And then Piglet joins him and they walk around again. So now there are 3 woozles and 1 whizzle. And then Piglet gets scared and runs off and Christopher Robin saves the day. Right? Now in social science, that's called the woozle effect. Somebody does something, then everybody else keeps following it. Yeah, and Agile has been totally and utterly prone to that from day one.
Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
There's a question here that probably I will start answering and you all can pitch in. Is a hybrid combined Agile and waterfall project a recipe for disaster, or is there merit in such an approach? So this is a very common question. It's asked a lot of times. So my take on this is you won't become agile by snapping your fingers, right? It's not an overnight process. You are at a stage, and to be in a nirvana stage, you will take some time. You will spend some energy. You will spend some time. It won't happen on day one. So this is a process, this is a journey that you will learn from. Hence, I would say that you will be in that phase, in whatever phase you were in, to reach to a certain stage where you think that you are creating that feedback loop, you are feeling faster, you are incorporating those logical practices, right? Hence, sometimes people use that phase to call as, oh, we are in water Scrum fall, or we are whatever, Scrum Kanban or Scrum Ban. There's so many of these jargons. So my answer to that is, it could be a phase, but always have to keep in mind that where are you going? You are not reaching, as I think Ben mentioned, that it's not about reaching a goal, it's about the journey, how you are learning.
I think there's a wider issue on this as well. I mean, I had the privilege of teaching leadership with Peter Drucker when he was alive. And one of the conclusions we both came to is that scientific management and complexity thinking have a lot in common. Yeah, and both of them are opposed to systems thinking, because what happened with systems thinking when it came in the 80s and 90s, it was an engineering metaphor, and it tried to remove human judgment. You know, if you look in scientific management, people have lifetime employment, they go through apprentice schemes. And what happened from the 80s and 90s onwards, we had a series of fads in which people had to be something. Yeah, before the 80s and 90s, you just did an apprenticeship, you did things, you used tools, you used methods, yeah? You didn't do transformation programs. And then we got business process re-engineering, blue ocean strategy, red ocean strategy, Agile. It's like every 2 years, there's a whole new thing you have to be, which generates revenue for transformation programs and consultants. Yeah. And I think what we need is a much more pragmatic, this is a theory-based approach. You need to understand context, you need to use different methods and tools within an overall structure, and you need to stop trying to be something. And if there was one thing I would ban completely and utterly, it's the mindset word. Yeah, I mean, it's really bad science. There is no such thing as a mindset. Yeah, I mean, or a mental model, for example. I mean, these are all cute concepts of the 80s, but we know much more about it now. So start to think about deep pragmatism and doing smaller things faster and joining up people in groups, and stop talking about being anything.
Actually, I'd like to join in on that with Rohit's question about, do technical managers need to be technically proficient? And talk about this idea of being something. So I guess I want to chop the question down a little bit here and ask the panel and maybe you in the audience here, do you feel like you need test managers? Is that a phase that you feel like you need staff qualified for? Do you manage it a different way? Jill, you're just on mute at the moment. Try again.
You're muted.
That will depend totally on the project itself, and of course on skill sets. I mean, I can take that and broaden it, that in any project we've got roles that we need. How we carve those roles up across the people doesn't need to be rigid, as long as at the end of the day we get all the roles covered off without overloading somebody. But we don't necessarily need one person or a team of people in one of those roles. But I would argue, certainly in the CRM space where I play, I see a lot of problems because project managers in particular and other people in the project couldn't spell CRM if you gave them the letters. And they are a complete disaster because they argue, I'm the project manager, I'm the CEO of the company, I shouldn't need this. Or you can just tell me what I need. Like, just because you're the CEO, I can't teach you dynamics in 5 minutes flat, which is all the time you've got. It just doesn't work like that.
I think one of the things we're missing at the moment is we've got too many specialists and not enough generalists. So I think you need to be technology aware, but not necessarily technology competent. And one of the things we've done lately is to bring end user testing managers into system design. And again, that's to try and break the linear process, because if you bring testers into the original design, you improve the design because you can make it more testable and you increase the cycle. Yeah. I also wanted to pick up on this last one for Mark, which I think is interesting. This is the whole technology automation. Yeah. Now, I remember when I was at school, we had a very progressive headmaster. So one of the things he did is he made us all do RSA stage 3 typing. Now, you have to understand the context of 1970s Welsh grammar schools, which were male dominated. You know, typing was something done by dumb females in the secondary modern. Yeah, but, you know, I mean, that stayed with me for life. I'm 10-fingered, right? But the stupid thing he did was to teach us how to use punch card machines and say we'd have a job for life, right? And teaching kids Java code is the same thing. By the time they get to college, all of the technology they've been taught will be out of date. We need to be teaching them ethics and design and we need the humanities. I wrote a paper for ITIL recently, which said no systems engineer should be allowed out with some training in ethics because of the implications of what they're doing. And AI has always been the problem of training data sets. The training data sets are culturally biased. Yeah, and they get reinforced. So I think we really need to look at this in terms of technology as a tool. And we need to get that sort of development. We need people who can see the big picture rather than people who can just see a narrow silo.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that, actually. In Australia, we've had an introduction of a teaching method for our kids, to young kids, called STEAM. And I don't know if we have this in other countries, but the idea is that it's science, technology, engineering, and maths. It has art right in the middle of it there. Not quite in the middle, just off to the side. Just pretend I can't spell. But the thing is, the art is really important to that. Because art teaches you how to speak, how to think multilaterally, abstractly, to pick up human themes as well as the ones which are easily sensed by science. And kind of talking about like this in terms of like machine learning and artificial intelligence, sometimes if you apply some of that multilateral kind of abstract thinking to that, you can start to see that, well, first of all, we know that there is no such thing as artificial intelligence. We only have at the moment machine learning, and it's important to use those nouns clearly as to one is science fiction, one is science fact. But the other is like to kind of think about what the implications of something like using machine learning in a human context. So I've worked with an HR company. We've looked at using artificial intelligence for hiring people for jobs and such like that. And we've run models on data sets, and those models have, interestingly enough, for people who might work in software or something like that, they would pick someone in their 30s who's male and lives in a certain area of Melbourne, not based on any of their skills or any of their human qualities, but because those are common themes that have been picked on previous people. So all the computer is doing is trying to kind of work out the cogs to fit the result, whereas we're not trying to get to a result with ethics. What we're trying to do is build the cogs themselves. And you're not going to be able to find that with technology. It needs a deeper layer of soul, I think. Yeah.
You've got a big negative in Australia on this at the moment, which regrettably we're copying in the UK. So you used to teach philosophy in primary schools, and it was very
back to that. Yeah.
So art is critical. Art comes before language in human evolution. If you look at what you're now doing in the university system, if you want to study something on technology with lots of employment, you will pay lower fees. If you want to study the humanities, your fee rate goes through the roof, which means actually humanities become the privilege of the elite whose parents can afford them. That's going back to 18th century. And now we're repeating that, all right? So I think there are issues on education here. And if you know anything about epigenetics, the danger is if we place too much reliance on machine learning, we will lose intelligence. And we can do that within 1 or 2 generations. So we really need, we put a lot of work at the moment to creating training data sets, which are epistemically just. Right?
Yeah,
and most IT people can't cope with that because they don't want to think about the training data set. They just want black box AI.
Yeah. And maybe we kind of circle back to something here, which is what specialists might be for. And this kind of applies to artists as well as scientists. And I feel like specialists are there to make complex things simple. And maybe along the way, we've kind of lost our way a bit with what we view as art, what we view as science, which is about kind of doing things for their own sake. But artists are there to make complex things simple. And the same with scientists.
They're there to make them understandable, which isn't the same thing as making them simple.
Well,
what art does is it's an abstraction, right? And the abstraction allows you to see patterns. Sorry, Jill.
I like that distinction because, and again, this is another point I made in my presentation earlier. People want it to be simple. And often the reason that they want it to be simple is that they're making decisions that are really ahead of their skill level. And that's another area that causes problems, because the the way I explained it in my presentation is vendors then get into the, if you work with us, it'll be easy, it'll be simple, which of course then wins them the project. But that's actually not a way, any guarantee that the overall project actually will be successful. And so it's that dog eat dog is one of the contributors to the failure rate.
I think it's the problem at the moment, to use a metaphor, people want recipes. They don't want to put the effort into becoming chefs. And I think that, to me, is the key distinction. Agile has become a collection of recipes with certificates. And, the experience and knowledge of a chef is the ability to produce a wonderful dish with whatever you happen to have in your kitchen. Because they know the theory and they've learned the practice. And the move towards simplification is actually a move not to make things simple, but to make them simplistic. Yeah?
Yes. And if we continue on the recipe idea, that if you go too far to the only way you can cook is using HelloFresh or one of those things that deliver you the ingredients and the recipe in a box, you'll never be able to make something nice and healthy out of what happens to be in your fridge unless it's in a HelloFresh box. And hence we start to see those problems. But that, again, HelloFresh are doing very nicely, thank you.
Yes, you were about to say something. I was going to jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading these two questions around test managers need to be highly proficient or the sort of automation around testing. I think these questions are coming from the insecurity that is going around in the market around these roles, that am I becoming redundant? Do we need testing managers or testers or manual testers? In my presentation also, I answered some of these questions. I think the way we are going ahead with automating everything, which is the right approach, and I'm completely aligned with what we were talking around the human skills, right? It's important to also acknowledge that what are the skills gaps that are there and how we need to make ourselves market ready. Yes, manual testing might not be around in a game changer right now. So not to create that insecurity over here, but I think it's natural to progress around how the trend is proceeding, how we are, for example, Dave just gave an example, we're teaching all our kids coding right now. Let's code in Python, let's code in Java. And by the time they will reach university age, they will have something else ready. So we have to, while we're teaching this to kids, we have to teach back to ourselves as well that learning is something that has to be continuous. We can't keep learning aside that we took our degrees and that's it, and we'll keep on banking on those things. So I think continuous learning is what my approach would be around any kind of role.
Yeah, good call out. I think it's kind of a nice segue into Srikatha's question here about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And I've been thinking about this, and I guess I would say culture over both, because if you think about like a process and tools, those are sometimes, when you talk about specialists and generalists, and generalists are sort of an aggregation of specialists sometimes, when what goes on inside someone's head, we're talking about processes and tools, is the same thing. They're running processes inside their mind and the way that they're kind of reasoning things through. And what actually forms the framework for the way that people in your organization or that you deal with, communicate as well as sort of think things through on their own, will be the culture that you instill in your company. So I feel like whenever I end up on these panels, I always end up talking about culture, because culture is your game changer. It's the way that you get people to operate really efficiently or really inefficiently. And it's the way that you get people to think about learning, talking about Yasha's point, or about following process, where we've talked about that before. So we need to be kind of aware in the moment, and you need cultures that allow for that, and the way that you do that is by making a safe space, and some of the other things I guess I've spoken about. So yeah, neither culture. I don't know, the others, maybe you have ideas.
Something that I'd like to comment on is, whatever we're teaching, we need to be very careful not, in spite of it's what people want, to take it right down to that click here, do this, do that type level. We need to stay above that and make sure that people get the concepts and get the why. Not something that I mentioned in today's presentation, but something I do speak on, is looking at how people learn, and therefore how we should key into that with training, and making sure that the why is always covered. And then, to use your example, Yasha, when we're teaching programming, we obviously have to choose a language, and it has to be a language that exists today. But the focus shouldn't be the absolute fine detail of Java or Python or Pascal, as I taught in a previous life. The focus should be all of those concepts around programming. So that if you've got those, regardless of what you learnt it in, you can then pick up whatever language our kids need when they're 20 or 30. Whereas if we just teach them Java or Pascal or Python or whatever else you choose, yes, on the balance of probability, that our kids, and I'm assuming our kids are not of employable age, are not going to be able to get a job using those skills. And the same is true with everything. When I was at school, we were not allowed to calculate until we were both 15, and demonstrated that given time in our heads, we could do what the calculator would do for us. My husband's son had a calculator at about 9, and he worked out, he wasn't very bright, he worked out how to copy the numbers from a sum into the calculator and copy the answer into his book. But he hadn't got a clue what was actually going on.
I think I'd agree with that. I think the sort of craft skill, the ability to understand something, is key. And also, where we're running over time, I've got to go on to another call. But I think the culture word is one of those ones which is abused. So I agree, it's one of the main drivers. But culture can't be engineered. Culture is represented in the water cooler stories of this day-to-day interaction. And you can stimulate culture, you can map culture, you can do vector changing culture, but you can't create a culture. You can't engineer a culture.
No.
The minute you create a statement about what sort of culture you want to be, you just teach people the language that they'll feed back. They don't really create.
And another friend, another speaker, colleague of mine, speaks on unwritten ground rules. And that's very much so, how we do things around here. And the unwritten ground rules never, almost by definition, get documented. But they're the ones that are followed.
A final comment is that I do have to go. Part of the problem the IT community has is they don't like uncertainty. The thing which makes them good coders actually makes them bad at managing ambiguity and uncertainty. Yeah, so we need a little bit more cognitive diversity in the IT community. Yeah. Either way, I must go because I meant to be on another call 5 minutes ago. So yeah.
Thank you, Dave, and
Dave.
And you. It was fun.
So, Ben, I was just thinking we are running it slightly over, but if everybody wants to give a final statement, and then we can end there. Is that
okay? Yeah, sure. I'm happy to kick that off. Man, where do we even start? I guess we've talked about a lot of different things here, ranging from safe and agile and different processes, and why processes shouldn't be followed for their own, course, but actually think about their merit and have kind of an awareness of what you're doing and an awareness of why you're doing it. And we've talked about a number of different things in terms of ethics and how that applies to choosing the right tools. How would I round that up? I think for me, overarching, I guess my talk is a lot about evolvability, and one of the other talks I have is around like how evolvability, how culture, how do you do those? I'd leave that question with you. How do you build a culture which is so focused on feedback that it will do anything to orbit around that? If you can do that, and there's a lot of people who talk about how that can happen, then get up here and speak about it, because it's the most important thing out there, to have those evolvable, feedback-oriented cultures where people are safe. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone here.
Yeah, I mean, how it was a great discussion, and yes, we talked about so many topics from processes to kids to how the whole IT community is growing. I think how I would like to summarize this and around my presentation as well, that there are lots of success stories out there. We need to be a little bit picky in terms of understanding that how they just show off, or there were something really at a fundamental level, something really change. Sorry, I'm losing the word. Some change that has really brought the culture shift in terms of mindset of people and practices and processes. So I was reading this comment somewhere, probably in DevOps Journal 2021, that we should ban the words transformation and change, because human beings mind, it works against change, against transformation. So we should rather modify these terminologies and call improvement, right? So it should be an improvement culture. It should be something to look at, that how we'll go from point A to point B, and what will be that journey, including the learning. So for my summary, my takeaway would be that from this discussion. Thank you.
And I think my summary is more related to my first love around education and possibly training rather than testing. And that is how we really need to broaden skill sets. So move people away from being too specialized. I like to think of people, we need to get people so that they're all like an old-fashioned telephone dial. So maybe they're an expert in this bit here, but they've got knowledge in all of these bits as well. They don't disappear totally in all I know is this middle bit. Because we get too many people like that on a project, we get these islands of knowledge, and that's then when anything will break down, whether it's the testing, the development, whatever, even the using of the software. If all you know is that little bit, it's going to go wrong. Not least of which when somebody outside of your immediate group does something a little bit different, and of course you don't know how to handle it. So again, pulling on another example, if you've trained somebody to take a credit card for payment and they know how to take the card, wipe it, swipe it, enter the amount and so on, in other words, the straight through process, that's great. And they will probably be able to handle 95% of the people at the checkout. But what will they do when somebody whose card hasn't got any credit left, or is damaged, or has been traveling? And all of those need to be dealt with significantly differently. What are they going to do? Just say, oh, this is outside my skill set. Off you go, take your goods, I don't care. And yes, we're now nearly 15 minutes over, and I've got things in the oven, so maybe we should call this a day.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us to hear this panel and for your good questions.
Yes. Well, once again, from Unicom, thanks to all the speakers, and look forward to your participation in the future. And just for all the delegates, we do have a networking and booth viewing session now. So just as a day's end, please visit our sponsors. They make this event happen, and I'm sure they can give you some interesting information. Okay, thank you guys, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.